Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Revenue Growth Agency webinar. It's just the two of us today, just myself and Andy, and we are covering off a really exciting topic today, which is how you can incorporate Netflix advertising into your new customer acquisition strategy. It's something that we're both really excited about, and we think it's a really great opportunity for brands. So we're going to dive in just a second. As always, a little bit of housekeeping. We're here for 30 minutes, so as close to 30 minutes as we can make it. And if you have any questions or comments, then please leave them in the comments below us, and we'll either respond to them as we're going through the topics today, or we'll come back to you after our webinar's finished. We'll also be sending out recordings to everyone that's registered with us here today. So if you have to nip out at any point, don't worry, that you'll get a recording back to you as well. So, Andy, we touched upon this a little bit last month when we were talking about untapped marketing channels, and CTV is something in particular that I'm very excited about and very kind of invested in. But I'm keen to hear your views in terms of, I guess, CTV as a whole. In particular, we're looking at Netflix today and how that forms a wider piece of the strategy that we use at Revenue Growth Agency for new customer acquisition in particular.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because where it sits is firmly in the upper funnel, which we call the build stage. So in the build stage, particularly when focused on talking to new customers, that really is where you have a very limited chance with a very unique and potentially different audience to what your usual ICP is as a brand. You've got a very sort of short window, short attention to get in front of them and get engaged. And CTV generally, specifically Netflix in the example today, is a really good way to get in front of lots of people quite quickly and in a relatively short space of time. Now, typically, I think the problem has been that traditional television channels are the ones that have led the charge on this. And so that excludes many brands based on cost. Not everybody can afford the slot between, Britain's Got Talent on a Saturday night to build some awareness for their audience. So what CTV does, and the reason why it's rising in popularity is because it's billed on a cost per thousand, a CPM basis. And in theory, not on all channels, but Netflix is one of them, the minimum spend in brackets is a cost of 1,000 impressions, and that can be anywhere between £25 and £45. So for really significantly low numbers, you get in front of quite a lot of people that you wouldn't have done normally. So I think that's the first thing of interest for people.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you touched upon something interesting there in terms of CTV being increasingly popular, especially in the States. They're looking at 21% increase in CTV spend year on year from advertisers, which as an emerging channel is obviously a huge number. So I think it's potentially not as popular or well known in the UK just yet in terms of it forming a really significant piece of people's marketing strategies, especially for D2C brands, especially for e-commerce brands. It's definitely something to explore. Looking at Netflix in particular, the ad-supported tier of Netflix is relatively new. It was something that they brought in, I think it was talked about around a year ago, and it was specifically to try and kind of increase their user base, but also there was a lot of password sharing and things like that they wanted to try and eliminate. So they brought in an ad-supported tier. Obviously, also being a business, they want to kind of drive as much revenue as they can. Having said that, the ad-supported tier is not a free tier. No. It is still a subscription that people have to pay for. As it stands, there are 40 million global active users every month of the ad-supported tier of Netflix, which, although if you were to compare that with the users of Facebook is a small piece, 40 million is still huge and potentially growing over time as more people sign up for the ad-supported tier to test, what the programming is like on Netflix if they've never had it before, using it almost as like a trial period and things like that. So I think it can't be underestimated how popular the ad-supported tier of Netflix is. And it's an audience, as you said before, that people may not have tapped into.
Yeah. I think the barrier for it as well, psychologically, is what tends to happen in newer brands that don't have huge volumes of investments is they almost start inversely in building their brand. So they know that everyone uses Google Ads, for example. They know everybody's in shopping. They know everybody's in that uses Meta, and so they try and dominate that space first and start with that space. But we use this phrase all the time in the agency that you can't sell more to the same people for a long period of time. You have to sell more to new people at some stage. And every brand, doesn't matter whether they're luxury footwear, whether they're, Range Rover cars, it really doesn't matter. At some stage, you have to introduce your brand to a wider audience in order to grow. And I think that the challenge when started at the bottom of the funnel, you become very numbers focused. You become very performance marketing led, and you employ people to look at last click ROAS, and you employ people to say, oh, don't pay more than this per click. And if we move over 3 times ROAS, we're in big trouble. And what tends to happen is the business grows through the roots of this very performance led space with channels that historically have only really been bottom funnel. They've only really captured intent. So I think the leap from that into doing something which is more generated intent is quite a psychological difference for e-com teams and brand owners, particularly founder-led brands, where they're looking at the sort of finer detail. They think, wow, spending a few £1,000s on Netflix to generate intent and build awareness is like, well, it's just, throwing money into the wind. So there needs to be this bridge and a movement away from the whole sort of performance marketing and move into what we are starting to call performance branding, which is using a performance channel, of which Netflix is one, and trying to build some structures and measurements in place that allow you to follow the sort of traffic from that initial intent building, the initial awareness piece that they get from seeing a really good, brand ad in amongst the, baby reindeer or whatever the laser stuff is on Netflix. It's probably got that wrong. And trying to sort of manage that through into revenue. And it doesn't mean you can't look at return on ad spend for Netflix. We just have to be sensible about how we do that. And maybe a bit later, I'll sort of talk about one way that we're starting to develop that.
Yeah, great. I think there's something that I wanted to add to that in terms of kind of the benefits of essentially like silver screen advertising. So this also applies to linear TV, but would apply to BVOD, SVOD, these ad-supported subscription plans. And there are, a number of benefits, especially when you're working up towards the top of the funnel, as you say. Obviously, the big one just being volume of eyes being able to see your ads. Generally, people's attention spans are slightly stronger when they're watching a TV screen or watching kind of programming rather than short form videos. So if we're looking at long form content, people's attention spans seem to be higher. So, they are potentially watching those ads. If they're not watching them, they're listening. You can still listen and kind of scroll on your phone at the same time. So you're getting the benefit of people's attention more so on that kind of medium. But also interestingly, and there's been a lot of research in this, in terms of perceived success and perceived reputation of brands that advertise on television, whether that's streaming or whether that's on linear TV. And that is generally as a consumer or as a watcher of TV. If you see a brand advertise between shows on a television screen, regardless of, what it is you're watching, there is a perceived notion that that brand has money, has a success to some extent, and has trust and reputation.
Good point.
And, there's no reason why our brains go there. But historically, when we think of TV ads, we think of those big household names and we think of big budgets. Oh God, they must be spending a fortune on TV ads because they're here, there and everywhere. And that's kind of bled into all of the other expectations that we have when we come to watch ads on TV. We assume that these brands have a lot of money, and in order for them to have a lot of money, they must have a really high turnover. People must trust to buy from them. So there's almost this strange kind of perceived notion of the type of brand that advertises on telly. And
sorry, Danielle.
I was going to say it's CTV in particular, not crazy expensive. And you don't actually have to be a really established brand. It can actually work if you're a newly established D2C or e-commerce brand and you just want to get awareness out there. People will assume that you're a really well-known brand if you're on TV, and they just think, oh, why have I not heard of them before? So it's really interesting in terms of the relationship between viewers and advertisers when it comes to that kind of medium. I find it so interesting, but it's actually it can be a benefit for newer brands.
Yeah, and I was just going to add on to that then. I think some of the barriers, I'll come on to another barrier that I've had sort of feedback from talking to clients, I know you have as well, about this. One is that they feel like it needs to be of cinematic quality with, beautiful models swishing through the sand and, and filmed on a beach in Santorini or whatever. The reality is not that, is it?
It's not. I will say, though, there are expectations when it comes to the quality of the advertising. So contextually, your ad has to fit the realms of the channel and the platform in which it's being served. So, if you're watching Stranger Things or Bridgerton or Ozark, Narcos, any of those, Breaking Bad, even any of those big high production shows, which the majority of Netflix shows are, and then suddenly you see an ad that is kind of a lower quality or very sales, contextually it's misaligned. So your brain will go, oh, that's weird. And you'll almost switch off, or you'll then have a bad reaction, or, you'll think slightly less of the brand. So be aware of that in terms of the quality or the style of the ad in particular having to fit in with that. And that's what we talk about when we talk about storytelling. So we've got loads of content about storytelling and how that feeds into ad creative. So if you're unsure about what we mean in terms of the style and the story, go back and maybe pick out a couple of our storytelling pieces and resources. So make sure it fits in with that. But in terms of actually filming it, you could film it on an iPhone. You can film in 4K on an iPhone. So you could do that. Doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a big BAFTA or, Oscar nominated director do it. But just be aware in terms of actual resolution and pixel quality and that kind of thing has to stand up against whatever you're doing. I would also steer away from trying to potentially adapt your social first creative. So if you've got UGC or content that's been specifically made for social, it might not work in the same capacity. So bear that in mind. When I talk to clients, actually most of the ads or the creative that work really well are brand videos that they've shot for new season releases. So a fashion brand that's releasing SS24 or AW24 will normally do a big video shoot for branding purposes, and that's normally the type of content that works a lot better than the stuff that they're doing for socials.
And remember, it's a bit like search was and social was maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. The landscape is fairly bare in terms of your competition. Netflix are in, I think it's an alpha release now, but it's limited. So there's not lots and lots of people allowed to gain access to being live. So, and they're offering all sorts of, ad credits, which we'll come on to later on. But, the barrier to entry is the lowest it will be, likely it will ever get to, particularly from a Netflix point of view. So, what is there to lose? Move £1,000 or £2,000 of your meta budget that may or may not be generating a particularly high ROAS at the moment, or your Google Ads budget just temporarily for 30 days. move it across. Use some of your season brand shoots. I know you do a lot of the editing for us here in Every Growth Agency, Danielle, but so a lot of the time it's just bringing what's already there together into a nice, sensible story. I wouldn't say it's simple to do, but certainly it's easy enough to be done within the realms of possibility of footage that you've already got as a brand, and test it. There's nobody else in the water, so you're going to get the best possible response and return from it.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a misconception about TV in particular, whether that's streaming or linear, that ads have to be like all guns blazing. We look at the likes of kind of Just Eat and Deliveroo and Domino's, and they've got these giant campaigns, and they've got Katy Perry wearing a hot dog costume, like singing all these jingles, and it really doesn't have to be like that. Twinings is a really good example. They had some really lovely, simple advertising of just it was like a car on a cliff, and someone was sitting on the bonnet drinking the tea.
Yeah.
And it was just a really nice kind of like wide shot, and then it panned into a close-up. It had some really nice music, and it was about relaxation. So it was really simple, it was really slow. Could have easily have been filmed on a phone, on like a stabilizing tripod. Barely any editing apart from maybe some color grading, which you can learn how to do either on YouTube, or Adobe do really good video editing tutorials. Really simple and really effective. So I think it doesn't, sometimes more is more, sometimes less is more, and it's going to come down to the product you're selling and what your audience wants and things like that. But yeah, I think expectations have changed a little bit in terms of what those ads need to look like, which is really great for brands that maybe don't have the type of budget that other brands have.
Yeah, and let's have a quick chat about what just comes to mind there when you're thinking about the type of creative. And whether people engage or not, because at the end of the creative, you can put a URL, and on some devices there is a click-through ability to go through to a website. But second screening is an interesting one, and that's been something that's been bandied around for a long time, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And essentially, it's referencing on the main television, you've got a family, couple, individual who is watching a show, and then their phone goes off. And then they're into the phone, and essentially they're watching, in theory, watching in brackets, the main show on the television, but they're actually interacting with a second screen, sometimes third screen. So some people will be on an iPad doing something, watching something in the background, and then their phone goes off, and they're sort of having a social media conversation with someone via the phone. So talk us through what your sort of view on that is, and how that impacts things. Is that a good? Obviously, socially, it's not a good thing, but
yeah, it's a really interesting question. I find second screening fascinating, and it kind of shows how kind of complex we are as consumers of media.
Yeah.
It can be a really powerful advantage if you're able, and this would be complete coincidence, but hypothetically, if you were running CTV ads on Netflix, and during the ad break, normally during ad breaks, people pick up their phone and they scroll through Facebook or Instagram because they're not interested in the adverts. If you had a really engaging piece of audio or, opening shot, they'll look up and they'll watch the screen. And then they might go back to their phone 10 seconds later. So they're not watching your whole ad. If you were running an acquisition strategy on Meta, they might then scroll, and just by coincidence, your ad might then also appear on their phone. So that's one advantage in terms of you being able to kind of be everywhere. Another advantage of second screening is that it allows the opportunity for people to immediately search for you. So, they've never heard of you before. Your ad pops up during their Netflix break. They like what they see. They might not potentially be in market for that product yet. And this is something I say all the time. Not everyone's going to be in the market to buy your product immediately. But there's been an interest there. And they've got their phone in their hands, so they can immediately Google who you are. They can Google and find your website. They can search for you on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook. There's so many opportunities for people to be able to immediately find out more information about you. So that's another benefit of second screening. I would also say as well, in terms of auditory response, if you do have really powerful audio, that can be good for recall, regardless of whether people are watching their ads or not. So you might think because someone's scrolling on their phone, they're not noticing what is happening on the telly. And that might be the case from a visual perspective. But if you've got a really strong audio or voiceover or like audio cue or branding or anything like that, that can still be remembered and recalled. So it's such a huge topic to talk about, but I would definitely say that it's not going to hinder your performance if you decide to start running TV ads. You're worried that people aren't going to pay attention, because they will.
Yeah, and also there's lots of studies done by lots and lots of sort of marketing professors about the subconscious absorption of a marketing message. That somebody doesn't, attention doesn't necessarily need to be 100% for that ad. It can be a recognition that of a face, of a scene, of a color path. It can be something that's subconscious, that when it's seen a second time, for example, through a meta ad, there's a connection in the brain that says, oh, I've seen that somewhere before. They mightn't even know that they saw it in a Netflix ad. They mightn't even know that they've seen it before anywhere, but they recognize it. And that is almost what we're trying to achieve with this. It's not that someone sees an ad, goes straight to the phone and goes xyz.com and then goes and buys 10,000 items off your website. That maybe not 10,000 items, but that will happen. So people will see the ad and they will go through to the site. But whether that's 1% or 10% response, it depends on what you sell and all the rest of it. Higher order values generally have a longer gestation period, with lower order values, shorter one. But it's the impact that it has, that halo effect, that actually we're most interested in. And you only have to look at any television study from the 1990s, where it was primarily, channel 1, 2, 3, 4, and the studies where brands would invest in those days millions, but the return on ad spend was huge. They might spend £1 million on a 30-second TV ad, but actually generate 5, 6, 7 million from it. So it's this halo effect and the awareness and the intent that you're building, that you then capture through your Meta, through your Google ads, through shopping, through direct, through referral channels. It's where you collect that heat, if you like, that intent that's built up, that makes this a worthwhile channel, in our opinion.
For sure. Let's bring it back down now to Netflix specifically. We've had conversations with clients about introducing Netflix into their marketing strategy. We have been met with some questions, and I thought it would be useful for us to maybe share and address those questions. So the main question, isn't it, Andy, that we come across is that because it's a lower subscription cost, does that mean that the audience has less disposable income?
So the official answer from Netflix is they don't know. That's the official line. And what they mean is that this is a relatively new system. It's not even in general release yet. So you'd need to speak to an agency like us or others that can connect you. The platform that they're using to serve the ads from is Microsoft Ad Exchange. So through a Microsoft Ad platform, that's where it gets added in. So they don't know officially. But if you look at other examples, first things first is that it's not free. So some of the objections are that it doesn't have high net worth individuals. If they were high net worth individuals, then they'd pay the $17.99 top package. But you don't have ads on the $17.99 top package, so they wouldn't pay. Now, the bottom package that does have ads is $5.99. That's enough from consumer psychology stroke behavioral point of view. It's enough of cash being handed over every single month to question whether somebody has the means to afford that. If they don't, and they're not high net worth individuals, generally they're not on Netflix. It's that barrier that you overstep when you decide to spend a penny on something. Even something changes in the mind, and it singles out or identifies, groups people in different sort of areas. So it's a bit like Aldi. So we were having this chat before the call. So Aldi are a discount store, but they trade their marketing messages on two different things. One is discount, we're the cheapest, we're the cheapest, we're the cheapest. They're actually not in most cases, but anyway, that's what they push out there. And the second thing is quality. So they push the quality. Our meat's better than Tesco's. We've got more of it. It's more. It's farm assured. It's better sourced. It's sustainable. All that sort of. They're pushing that message. Why are they doing that? Well, one appeals to high net worth individuals, and one doesn't. So they're really covering the sort of landscape there. Really. Now, if you translate that to Netflix, is they have a lower entry point. So yes, people that maybe don't want to spend £20 on the top package can get away with $5.99, and they'll accept the ads. But what Netflix are training is, it doesn't matter which package you get, you still see the same top shows. By and large, you see the same top shows. So the gut feel is that you're going to get in front of some people that maybe aren't your exact high net worth individual. If you're targeting the luxury or premium space, for example, but based on the cost of entry and based on the volume of people, you're still probably going to get in front of quite a lot of the people that you want to.
Yeah, and I think actually it's a risk that you run with anything.
True. Look at Google Ads.
Yeah, Google non-brand searches, on Google Shopping. Not everyone's going to be able to afford. No one's typing in, expensive summer dresses. They're typing in a description of something, and then your ad's going to be served whether they can afford your product or not. There's always going to be a little bit of leakage. So to weigh up, there's going to be some people watching those ads that are never going to be able to afford us over increasing reputation and exposure. I think that's something as a brand you would have to have a discussion about. But as you say, at the moment, it's never going to be cheaper to do it than now. So you might as well kind of reap the rewards of it while you can, if you've got a slightly tighter budget, before things start getting more expensive or competition starts getting higher. There isn't really a better time to test it than now. And I think Netflix is in a very good position, because I think it's like 60% of the top viewed TV shows over the past year have been Netflix productions. That's a huge amount of eyeballs and a huge amount of hours of content consumed. And it's only going to get more as, season finales of things start popping up. People will buy the ad-supported tier just to watch one show.
Yeah.
For a month, so it's such a complicated beast. But, the reputation that Netflix has as a media provider is huge. And the people that watch it as a platform are very invested most of the time in the original content. And there is an option, isn't there, Andy, for you to be able to just target those top 10 charts?
Yeah, so you can do top 10, run of network, and I think there's one or two other options. It's not like, if you go into Meta where you can target lots and lots of things, or you can't anymore, but you used to be able to target lots and lots of things. But yeah, you can decide whether you want to go after the top 10 or you just run a network. So just go sort of everywhere and see. You can also split by gender. So it's basically whatever information you give Netflix when you sign up. So, your date of birth, so your age and your gender, that sort of stuff. But just to pick up on your point on the cost side of it, because it is early days, for what we can get for anybody that's interested, if they get in touch, we can get hold of £2,500 worth of free ad credits if you spend £500 on new accounts. So if you've already got a Microsoft account, then that doesn't count so much. But if you're not on, for example, running Bing ads or Microsoft ads at the moment, and you're not running Netflix already, then all you need to do is spend £500 and Netflix will top up at £2,500. So you essentially get £3,000 worth of visibility for £500. So get in touch if you want us to help you with that and get that set up, because that's not going to be around forever, but it is around as of the launch of this webinar.
Perfect. Now, we are going to run over a little bit because there is one thing that we've not spoken about that I think is really key, but we're heading towards 30 minutes, so hopefully people can stick around. and that is reporting and the reporting minefield that comes with something that is this upper funnel, but also something that if you're watching on a TV, there is no click through. So obviously, if you're watching Netflix on a device, so a laptop, a tablet, a phone, as Andy mentioned before, there is an option for you to be able to assign a URL. So obviously UTM it, and so that you're able to track click-throughs. But if you're watching on a TV, you can't. So we have a particular way of reporting, which is to do with, you know, the old school linear TV type of reporting where you sit in front of GA and you watch the numbers increase as the campaign launches. But yeah, let's just have a quick discussion about kind of the nuances of this kind of reporting, but also acknowledging that it is very new. So, you know, there isn't a one shoe fits all way of being able to do it. Andy, I don't know if you have thoughts in terms of what's important to report on.
Yeah, I mean, keep it simple. There's lots of sort of detailed tools that you can get into, but the nuts and bolts of it are in platform, you get a certain amount of data. So you can see how many people have clicked through if it's on a device to your website or to whatever URL you send them to, of course. You can see how long the videos were watched for. You can see some impressions. You can see some very, very basic click-through rate, very basic figures in platform, and that's important to see how well the ad's been viewed and all that sort of stuff. So it'll help you next time. What we then do is look at GA4 and put some markers in the sand of a few things. One is the flight dates of your Netflix accounts, of your Netflix campaign. So let's say you went live on 1st of July to the 31st of July. Let's sort of earmark that time period in GA and put a note down. What we then do during that period is where we find most CTV activity manifests itself outside of platform data is through direct or organic brand searches. So what we're looking at is fluctuations within the direct channel and organic search channel within the walls of that month compared to previous year and also previous period. So while we've seen any fluctuations, and what we're looking at is things like users and sessions, the two first things, and obviously we're looking at revenue. So did we see any spikes in those areas during that window of flight? And then we put that on the landscape of, did we do anything else different that would skew the results? So seasonality, would that cause any issue? Although comparing year on year would fix that. Is there any massive PR campaigns going out there? Did we double our spend on Meta? Did we see a spike in the organic listings anyway because we've done a load of work on that? So we need to put it on a landscape of what's happening in the background and then apply some logic to it. But ultimately what we're looking at is what do we spend and what do we believe the uptick in revenue was? And then we can get a rough idea of what a blended ROAS figure looks like for that channel. And as it stands at the moment, without sort of unpicking things and going into super detail, that's enough to prove the concept.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that as well, if Netflix is influencing, as we said before, your direct or your branded traffic, or essentially anyone landing on the website, if you have your first party data set up properly, if you've got all of your pixels installed properly, if you have a very robust retargeting strategy, whether that's through Meta or, you know, display or programmatic or anything like that, you are then in a position to retarget that larger audience, take them on the journey that you take as a brand. So whether that's, you know, social proof or unboxing, UGC, you know, educational things, blog posts, however you deal with your remarketing, getting people to sign up to your email database. What Netflix is doing is opening that net far wider for you to be able to capture, keep warm and nurture those people to then eventually buy. And I think the beauty of being able to do it that way is that people become far less price sensitive. So you don't necessarily need to be offering new customers 10-15% off. Yes, it's a slightly longer journey, especially if your product value is higher, because you have to kind of prove to people almost that the quality of your product is worth it. But for us, new customer acquisition is all about pouring people into the top of the funnel, taking them on a journey, and then getting them to buy full price. Is essentially, as an agency, what we do and what we strive for every client.
Yep.
And I think Netflix, it already is and will become an even more powerful tool in being able to reach a different type of user, a different type of audience who potentially isn't on social media and doesn't get served your meta ads, and if it wasn't for Netflix would never know who you were. So I think that's a really important thing for e-commerce managers, or marketing managers, or CMOs to really kind of take away from this. Is that it's not going to be we switch on Netflix and suddenly we've got revenue pouring through the door, but it's a means of being able to sustainably grow over time without affecting your project profit margins.
Yeah, and also it's a good point that I mentioned that direct and organic organic search, typically is where you see the revenue. Actually, social search is becoming huge, really, for the younger demographics. So look at social search, and are people looking for your product on TikTok, for example, because they've seen something on Netflix? So don't sort of just zoom in on those areas, but we take a view of who your target and what the age group is, and build some metrics to measure accordingly.
Fab. We could probably talk about this for another 30 minutes, Andy, but I am very conscious that we've already run over. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we're really keen to have conversations with brands, even if you just have questions about how it works and kind of the practicalities of setting up the campaigns and what it might mean for you as a brand in particular. So if anyone does have any questions, please reach out to us. And yeah, we'll see you next month. Andy, do you have anything else to add?
No, it's been, hopefully it's been useful for people, and get in touch if you want to chat.
Perfect. Well, enjoy the rest of your week, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.